Welcome back. It's very nearly 8:15. You're watching and listening to Breakfast This Morning with Anne and Cameron. And we've got our lovely guests here with us who are going to look through the papers. Author Susan Holder and Emma Wolfe. Let's get straight to them, shall we? And Emma, in The Observer, Rishi Sunak has yet missed out on one of his other pledges, not just the boats.
Well, this is the annual kind of we are facing a winter catastrophe story about the NHS, and The Observer don't hold back. They talk about a catastrophic winter crisis for the NHS, that Sunak's pledges on waiting lists and beds have not been met. You know, the huge pressures on emergency services. You've got ambulances apparently stacked up outside A&E again, patients being treated in corridors and, you know, lack of beds and over-occupancy. And they're very clear, according to The Observer, they're very clear that this is to do with Sunak and the promises that he made that he's failed to honour.
You shouldn't make promises as a politician, I think, should you? I mean, I know that's what they want to appeal to us for our votes, but it's almost as though the minute you make a big promise, you always seem to be failing.
You're going to be undone by it, aren't you? Yeah.
But you need your policy. I mean, he set out those 5 key pledges, and I suppose, you know, he's being judged on those, and at the moment it's really failing.
But Emma, every year there seems to be some kind of NHS crisis in the winter. So is this one particularly different?
Well, I feel as though every winter we hear exactly the same story. We hear the festive getaway story, and we hear the, you know, misery of trains, people trying to get home for Christmas, and we hear the NHS, and it literally is every year, every winter, around this time or even earlier, we hear we're facing a flu pandemic a flu outbreak this year, the NHS is struggling, it's this politician's fault, it's that politician's fault. But The Observer are clearly, very, very clearly pinning the blame on...
But if it's not different this year, I'd like an explanation as to why, when my mum broke her pelvis about a couple of months ago, 2.5 months ago, she fell in her front garden, and obviously they called an ambulance, and it took 12 hours.
What?
For an ambulance to attend my 82-year-old... I can't tell you. And also, we know now that she had a fractured pelvis, but of course, at the time, they wouldn't have known what was wrong with the 82-year-old lady who had fallen over, and it took 12 hours. And she was also not admitted. She was taken in, told she got a broken pelvis, and sent home with no support, no help of any...
Don't they do something for a broken pelvis?
No, nothing you can do with a broken pelvis. They can't bind it or do anything. So it was a hairline fracture, but I mean, she couldn't walk, obviously, and couldn't move. So I had to move in, because that's what you do now, isn't it? Well, but what if I hadn't been there and couldn't have moved in? I don't know what would have happened. There was somebody in the bed next to her.
How did she alert you? How did you know it had happened?
She rang me when she got to hospital and said, "Don't worry, but I think I've broken my pelvis, but don't bother coming, because I'll obviously be here for days," not realising they didn't keep you in. And when I got there, they went, "She can go home now."
But if she couldn't move, how was she able to phone for an ambulance?
Well, a neighbour found her.
Thank goodness.
And sat with her for 12 hours.
My God.
Which is not an emergency service. So if things aren't worse now, and my dad had what he thought he'd had something, it wasn't anything terrible, actually, but he kind of thought he was having like a little mini stroke. It wasn't. But he got sent to the hospital. Well, he went to the hospital, and they said, he said there was just queues of ambulances all outside. This is all in the Midlands. And they said, yeah, we're not going to really see you for 9 hours. You might as well go home and just go to your GP the next day. And again, it wasn't anything. Both of them are fine. My mum has recovered. My dad didn't have anything bad. What happens to the people who aren't okay?
But I also feel so bad for the front-line staff, the paramedics, the junior doctors, who clearly have to cope with all of this and are bearing the brunt of patients, and there's nothing they can do about this problem.
But and it says here, in the piece in The Observer says they wanted to get cases down to 30 minutes for ambulances. The current average is 38 minutes. I hope that's true.
Where?
Yeah, I hope that's true.
The average where, in particular. Talking of nasty things happening to people, Susan, tell us about the Strictly Queen.
Yes, so it was the Strictly final last night, and possibly if you were waiting to watch it on catch-up, I won't spoil it for you, because it is, if you haven't watched it, watch it on catch-up. It is an amazing show. I'm a big Strictly fan, and I do think that the standard is just unbelievably good. Any of those 3 could have won, and I think I would have been happy. The person who did win
You're happy with it?
Yeah, I did want that person to win, but what I was really moved by, and I think a lot of people were moved by, was one of the Strictly dancers, Amy Dowden, has been suffering from breast cancer, and she doesn't get any luck, poor Amy. I mean, I've met her a couple of times. She's a lovely, lovely girl, and she's really going through it, obviously, with her breast cancer journey. But she was due to dance in the final, and she's broken her foot, so she couldn't do it. But they managed to work a bit, so she was able to appear. There was a lot of armography, I think is what they call it, technical term. So it was thrilling to see her back, and she danced without her wig on. She often does appear in the kind of Claudia's area.
So she's doing chemo, presumably.
She is. So and let's hope that by the time we get to the final next year, she'll be back fully dancing and with a partner. But it was a great.
It's interesting you talk about the standard, because apparently the judge, Craig Hallwood, got very tearful.
He did.
Because he was remembering what the very first
he said, I can't imagine Natasha Kaplinsky doing that, he said to I think, Ellie Leach.
So he's basically saying the standard has just gone up and up and up and up and up.
And a lot of people criticise Strictly for, some people have dance training. But if you're in show business and you're an actor or a presenter, you might have had something. Personally, I just like to see good dances. The people who win, to give you a clue, the people who win tend to be the ones who don't have the dance training, because people like to see that journey, and they like to see people coming in with, not being able to do it and then learning a skill. But at the end of the day, they're not winning a contract to do anything. So does it matter who wins, actually? It's just a great show. And it was last night. It was a fantastic show.
Emma, let's speed ahead to your story that you found in The Express about the COVID inquiry.
Yeah.
And the fact that it really... I lose... Don't you pull your hair out over this
I get so angry about this.
It's just not
really
the right
appalling.
things.
Yeah.
So what is this report saying?
Well, this is children's campaigners who are talking about the inquiry, which has already cost millions and millions. I think it's already up to about 50 million, but it's, it could top 200 million over the next few years. Probably won't conclude for, as I say, several years, I think 2026. But the children's campaigners are urging the COVID inquiry to stop focusing on Westminster gossip and who said what and passing the buck and all the political charade of politicians, of ministers, senior ministers, the Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister that we've seen over the past few weeks. And they want to focus on the damage that was caused to children and young people by closing schools, closing playgrounds, closing any kind of activities for children, any opportunities for children to get outside and exercise, any kind of...
You see, this is what I want to know. If it ever happens again, are we going to close schools?
Are we going to do this differently?
All you want an inquiry to tell you. What did we do wrong and what we're going to do next time?
Why were pubs and shops reopened before playgrounds? That kind of thing, which is... but also the months and months that children were out of school. It's not just education that suffered.
And then when they went into school, do you remember seeing the playgrounds had social...
Horrendous.
Borders, and you were allowed to stand in that chair, in that square, and you can stand in that. That's... Now, I think we see it as cruelty.
Cruelty, but also just the incalculable damage. I mean, we know that we're beginning to see the damage now in terms of children's mental health, in terms of huge rise in eating disorders, anxiety, depression. These are real. And when you're 13, 14 years old, that stuff carries on. It's a formative time of your life. The rest of us, well, I think we've all suffered, but the rest of us can bounce back because we were grown-ups.
But it's the most fundamental question, isn't it? If it happens again, are we going to close?
Do we have a plan?
Yeah.
I do think the unions have to kind of take a look at their role in all that as well, actually.
Because
I think the
school teachers didn't want to go back to school,
There was a lot of unions screaming for close the schools, close the schools. And even if they did close, I don't understand why there wasn't better structure of getting lessons out to a lot. Private schools managed to do it, and the state schools did not manage.
And what about the children that didn't have Wi-Fi and laptops and all of that?
Why don't you drive around and drop all those laptops that you've got in the laptop department in your school round to all the children who haven't? I mean, just do something. There was loads of things you could have done. That weren't done.
But do you think... Every time I switch on the television news or read a paper, everybody is saying this. This inquiry is not asking the right questions.
No, it's not. And it's
is that message getting through to them, or that bank of lawyers?
I do not
exactly,
care about
Anne, and it's based on the premise of lockdown. Should we have locked down harder sooner? Rather than was fundamentally lockdown and the way that we treated children and young people, many sectors, care homes.
Old people.
Was that the right way to go about this? And what would we do differently if we had a pandemic tomorrow, next week?
I just want to know, how do we get this message through to the blinking inquiry? I feel like getting everybody to sign a petition and just walking along to the inquiry and say, would you mind asking the questions we want answered?
That would be
yes, that would be revolutionary, wouldn't it? Will you come back?
Yes.
in the next hour. Thank you very much. In about 40 minutes. It'd be lovely to see you again.
I didn't know we had to wait for an invite at this time of year.
Right, let's catch up with the weather where you are. Here's Jonathan.